Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, April 7th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The US is against giving Ukraine a roadmap to NATO. So, Financial Times reported Thursday that the US is pushing back against an effort by some of its European allies to provide Ukraine with a roadmap toward NATO membership at an alliance summit this July that will be held in the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius. So, while NATO's position is that Ukraine will eventually become a member, Kiev has never been given a timeline on when it could possibly join. Sources told Financial Times that some NATO countries, including Poland and the Baltic states, want to offer Kiev deeper ties and clear statements on its future membership. Poland's president has previously said that NATO should offer Ukraine post war security guarantees. So the Financial Times report said that the US, Germany, and Hungary are pushing back against these efforts, and NATO members are expected to be locked in negotiations on the issue until the summit is held. So, Ukrainian President Zelensky has warned that he would only attend the summit if Kiev was presented with steps toward membership. NATO first promised that Ukraine would eventually join the alliance in 2008, despite warnings from William Burns, who at the time was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, and he currently serves as the CIA director. So Burns, while he was the U.S. ambassador in Russia, he said in a 2008 cable to Condoleezza Rice that was later released by WikiLeaks that Ukrainian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines for the Russian elite and not just President Putin. So they get this warning. They know, how provocative this is to Russia, yet they make this promise to Ukraine and also Georgia as well in 2008 at the Bucharest summit. So this sounds like this report. It looks like some, at least Poland and the Baltic states, and I would guess maybe the UK as well, wants to give some other kind of promise to Ukraine when it comes to NATO membership. Uh, Whether it's a timeline or formal steps that they need to take, something like that. Looks like they want to keep them on the hook a little more. And as I went over yesterday, Stoltenberg said that Ukraine must win the war against Russia and become more interoperable with the alliance to become a member. And he did not offer a timeline on membership, but he did say that the work to make Ukraine more interoperable is a long term project. And sources told Financial Times that all NATO members agree that offering Ukraine full membership is not a short term option because Ukraine is currently engaged in a war with Russia, but a growing number of alliance members support offering a political path. And any sort of new guarantee from NATO would be highly provocative toward Russia, as Ukraine's alignment with NATO was one of Putin's main motives for launching the invasion. So again, that summit is going to be in July, so a couple months away, and we will see a few months away, and we'll see what they end up telling Ukraine. All right, the next one here, NATO to hold its largest ever air exercises in June. So NATO is preparing to hold its largest ever air exercises known as the Exercise Air Defender that will involve 220 aircraft and 10,000 personnel from 24 nations. The drills will include a massive deployment of aircraft from the U.S. Air National Guard, which is tasked, they're tasked with defending the U.S. homeland, but they also maintain units for prompt mobilization during war. So it's a big deployment of these Air National Guard planes. 100 of them are going over to Europe. And the exercises will mark the largest U.S. Air Force's deployment to Europe for NATO drills since the alliance was founded in 1949. The purpose of the drills is to simulate what the U.S. would have to do if the war in Ukraine spread into NATO territory. So, Lieutenant General Michael Lowe, who is the head of Air National Guard, again, they're the ones that are supposed to be defending the homeland, but here they are sending 100 planes to Europe. He said, quote, "This is now putting the alliance together quickly with a credible force to make sure that if Russia ever lines up on the NATO border, that we're ready to go. We're going to defend every inch," end quote. So the drills will take place from June 12th to the 23rd and will stretch from Iceland to Romania, with most flights taking place over Germany and the North Sea. The massive show of force is a clear message to Russia and comes as the US and NATO are escalating support for their proxy war against Moscow and Ukraine. So, Finland, which formally joined NATO on Tuesday, will participate in the drills. And by admitting Finland, NATO has more than doubled its territory on the Russian border. And Ukraine is not going to participate. Ukraine does participate in some NATO drills, but they're not going to be involved in this one. All right, the next one here. Ukrainian official says that kicking Russia out of Crimea is still the plan. So, a Ukrainian official said Thursday that Kiev's goal of kicking Russia out of Crimea has not changed after an aide to Zelensky suggested that Ukraine might be open to negotiating the issue, as I went over yesterday. So, this is Tamila Tasheva, Zelensky's envoy. So, this is the Ukrainian envoy for Crimea. She told Politico, quote, "Ukraine will choose the way to bring Crimea back using political and military means," end quote. So a day earlier, the deputy of Zelensky's office said that Kiev would be ready to negotiate over Crimea if it launches a successful counteroffensive up to the peninsula's border. The comments were the first sign that Kiev might rethink its position that peace talks can only happen when Russia is expelled from the country. But this other official said that Russia will only be given two options: leave or be driven out. She said, quote, "To minimize Ukrainian military losses, minimize threats to civilians who live in occupied territories, as well as the destruction of civilian infrastructure, Ukraine plans to give Russia a choice on how to leave Crimea. If they don't agree to leave voluntarily, Ukraine will continue to liberate its land by military means," end quote. So, of course, Ukraine's Western backers, including the US, the Pentagon, they don't think Ukraine has the ability to retake the Crimean Peninsula. It's Russia has a big military presence there. You know, they had a base there before they formally annexed the territory in 2014. There's been a Russian naval base there since the 1700s. And Russia, of course, they still control a lot of territory to the north of Crimea. So there's a long way to go before Ukraine would actually threaten the peninsula. And a full-blown offensive against Crimea always risks a major escalation from Moscow. If their control of Crimea is really under threat, that could lead to a nuclear escalation. Putin has said, that they consider attacks. Crimea, I would say, I'm pretty sure Putin has said losing Crimea is an existential threat to Russia. And under Russia's military doctrine, they can use nukes if the state is facing an existential threat. And another thing, again, these Ukrainian officials say that they're going to liberate Crimea, but the people living there are happy that they joined Russia. That's what polling has shown. NBC actually recently sent a reporter over there and talked to people on the street, and they all said, "Yeah, we're not going anywhere. We'll fight if Ukraine tries to retake Crimea." So that's a huge, very, very important context when we're talking about this issue. All right. The next one here. So this is from the New York Times, and it says that Ukraine war plans leak prompts a Pentagon investigation. So classified war documents detailing secret American and NATO plans for building up the Ukrainian military ahead of a planned offensive against Russia were posted this week on social media channels. Senior Biden administration officials said the Pentagon is investigating who may have been behind the leak of the documents, which appeared on Twitter and on Telegram, a platform with more than 500 million users that is widely available in Russia. Military analysts said the documents appear to have been modified in certain parts from their original format, overstating American estimates of Ukrainian war dead and understating estimates of Russian troops killed. So again, I don't know. Who knows what the story is here? They're saying that these documents said that only 17,000 Russian troops have died, while 71,000 Ukrainian troops have died. And this is from early March. But they're saying that was altered, but who knows exactly what the deal is. I was trying to find these documents, what they actually say. Again, they're from March 1st. The document is labeled top secret, and it offers the status of the conflict as of March 1st. On that day, Ukrainian officials were at an American army base in Germany for war game sessions. And a day later, Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General Chris Cavoli, the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, visited the sessions. I remember that when they were helping Ukraine war game. Another document includes columns that list Ukrainian troop units, equipment, and training with schedules for January through April. The document contains a summary of 12 combat brigades that are being assembled, with 9 of them apparently being trained and supplied by the United States and other NATO allies. Of those 9 brigades, the document said the 6 would be ready by March 31st and the rest by April 30th. A Ukrainian brigade has about 4,000 to 5,000 soldiers. So that could have something to do with the timeline of this counteroffensive they might want to launch. Might want to wait for all those brigades to be done training. The document said the equipment delivery times would impact training and readiness in order to meet the timeline. So it's interesting. It sounds like there is some information here, and it's going around. And I was trying to find the documents. The New York Times being the good stenographers that they are for the Biden administration didn't think to include them so we could see what these documents say. We just got to take their word for it. But I'm sure they're going to turn. I was looking before. I just couldn't find anything, but I'm sure we'll be able to now that this story is out. I'm sure if anybody figures it out, please send it over. All right, but it is interesting. It's the first big leak we've heard of. I think what would be really great is if we got a big leak, WikiLeaks style cable dump of what the Biden administration, was saying in the months leading up to the invasion and what they've been saying to each other since then. I think that would really reveal a lot about their motives. All right, the next one here. Israel hits Gaza after rockets fired from Lebanon. So this is from Middle East Eye, and things keep spiraling over there. So Israeli jets bombed Gaza after rockets fired from Lebanon. The Israeli military launched airstrikes in the Gaza Strip on Friday, hours after rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel on Thursday afternoon. So at least 5 open and mostly uninhabited areas in the besieged enclave were hit just after midnight local time. There were no reports of casualties, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. So anti-ballistic missiles and rockets were fired from Gaza in response, triggering sirens in several Israeli towns and cities bordering the Strip. So earlier on Thursday, 34 rockets were launched from Hezbollah-controlled areas in South Lebanon towards Israel in the worst escalation between the two neighbors since the 2006 Lebanon-Israel war. So it's a pretty significant barrage of rockets, and it came in response to Israeli forces storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque 2 nights in a row and beating Palestinians there. So Israel blamed the barrage of rockets, which left 2 people slightly wounded, on Hamas, which is the Palestinian group that governs Gaza. Hamas denied knowledge of who was behind the attack. Now, I remember when this news first broke, some sources told Reuters that it wasn't Hezbollah. Hezbollah has not taken credit for firing the rockets. They said it was Palestinian factions based in southern Lebanon, and there are other groups. It's not just Hamas, but Israel is blaming Hamas. Minutes before Israel began bombing Gaza, the Joint Operations Room, which consists of the main armed factions in Gaza, said it was ready to respond to any aggression from Israel. Israeli media had reported that the government was preparing to attack Gaza and Lebanon. So far, we just see strikes in Gaza. The Gaza strikes came while the Israeli Security Cabinet was still in discussions on how to respond to the rockets from Lebanon. There were reports, too, that Israel did fire some artillery into Lebanon right after the rockets were fired. But Netanyahu said after the meeting of his security cabinet, he said, quote, Israel's response tonight and later will exact a significant price from our enemies, end quote. So it sounds like, there could be more bombing or retaliation from Israel, whether they bomb Gaza more or launch airstrikes in Lebanon. So we'll see how this all plays out. I don't think these tensions are going to ease anytime soon. Luckily, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are being there hasn't nobody's been killed yet by the bombings in Gaza or the rockets from Lebanon or the rockets being fired from Gaza. But it just doesn't seem like things are going to cool off. The next one here, this is from Mondo Weiss. The U.S. refuses to condemn Israel storming the Al Aqsa Mosque. So the Biden administration staunchly took Israel's side today, and this was on Thursday. State Department spokesman Vedant Patel refused to condemn Israel's storming of the Al Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, then went on to condemn the rocket attacks coming from Gaza and Lebanon. And the U.S. also stepped in to block a UN Security Council statement on the press to the press, criticizing Israel for the raids, according to an Israeli official. So the U.S. blocked a UN Security Council statement, I guess, condemning the Israeli beatings at the Al Aqsa Mosque, these Israeli forces storming it. That's nothing new. The U.S. usually does protect Israel as much as they can at the UN Security Council. The State Department was asked about the attacks in the last 2 nights by Israeli police and troops on worshippers at the mosque. Patel responded, quote, "We are concerned by the scenes out of Jerusalem, and it is our viewpoint that it is absolutely vital that the sanctity of holy sites be preserved. We emphasize the importance of upholding the historic status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem, and any unilateral action that jeopardizes the status quo to us is unacceptable. We call for restraint, coordination, and calm during the holiday season." So Mondo Weiss, they say, notice that Patel does not call out Israel for jeopardizing the status quo. And later, Patel commented on the rocket attacks. He said, quote, "We condemn the launch of rockets from Lebanon and Gaza at Israel. Our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, and we recognize that Israel has the legitimate right to defend itself against all forms of aggression." All right. Speaking of aggression, the next one here, Israel says that it's ready to attack Iran without help from the U.S. So the head of the Israeli Defense Forces said Wednesday that Israel is ready to attack Iran and could do so without help from the U.S. So this is IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. He said, quote, "We are ready to act against Iran. The Israeli army has the ability to strike both in distant countries and near home," end quote. The comments come as tensions between Israel and Iran are very high. Israel has ramped up its airstrikes in Syria, killed 2 members of the IRGC there last Friday, and Iran has vowed that it will respond. Israel has a history of launching covert attacks inside Iran, but it's not clear if Israeli warplanes could pull off airstrikes in Iran without assistance from the U.S. Halavi insisted that Israel can, as the IDF has been preparing to attack Iran. He said, quote, "We know how to act alone. We are a sovereign nation that reserves the right to make its own decisions. It would be good to have the United States on our side, but it is not an obligation," end quote. So the U.S. and Israel, they've been rehearsing for war with Iran by holding big military exercises. Back in January, they held their largest ever joint drills in a provocative message aimed at Tehran. We keep hearing this: largest ever drills in Philippines, largest ever drills in Israel, largest ever NATO aerial drills, largest ever drills in South Korea. I mean, there's a lot of big drills going on. And I just mentioned a little summary of everything I just went over at the end here about the tensions over Al Aqsa and the rockets being fired from Lebanon. All right, where are we here? The next one, Macron says that he can count on Xi for Ukraine negotiations. So French President Emmanuel Macron told Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Thursday that he can count on the Chinese leader to bring Russia to its senses and bring the warring sides in Ukraine to the negotiating table. Macron told Xi, quote, "I know I can count on you to bring Russia to its sense and bring everyone back to the negotiating table. We need to find a lasting peace. I believe that this is also an important issue for China as much as it is for France and Europe," end quote. So following the talks with Macron, Xi said that China and France should work together to push for a political solution to end the war in Ukraine and avoid steps that would escalate the conflict. Xi said, quote, "China is willing to call on the international community, along with France, to maintain rationality and restraint and avoid taking actions that will further escalate the crisis or make it out of control," end quote. So Macron said that the trip to China he made the trip to China with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU's European Commission president. So von der Leyen said that she expressed a willingness to speak with Zelensky and said that a conversation could happen when conditions and the time are right. So she emerged as a potential mediator between Russia and Ukraine after China released its 12-point peace plan for the conflict. And then he traveled to Moscow to meet with Putin. Zelensky has maintained maximalist demands as preconditions for peace talks, but he expressed an openness to China's proposal and wants to speak with Xi. President Biden has taken a much different approach to China's calls for peace by immediately rejecting the idea of Beijing as a mediator. Ahead of Xi's trip to Moscow, the White House came out against calls for a ceasefire in Ukraine. They don't want peace. But so Macron is kind of, throughout the war, even though they're all in on sending the military aid, he has been much more open to the idea of peace talks with Russia than most other NATO leaders. All right, the next one here, this is from the South China Morning Post. Beijing talks tough on Taiwan, but is expected to tone down its military response over the Tsai-McCarthy meeting. So Beijing vowed on Thursday to take resolute and powerful measures to defend China's territorial integrity following Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But observers say that they expect the response to be subdued. So describing the meeting as high profile, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that the Tsai-McCarthy talks seriously infringed upon China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and sent an egregiously wrong signal to Taiwan independence separatist forces. The meeting was also condemned by a wide range of agencies in Beijing, including the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National People's Congress and the Communist Party's Taiwan Work Office, which said Tsai and her Democratic Progressive Party were pawns for anti-Chinese forces. The Defense Ministry said that the People's Liberation Army would, quote, stand by its duties, maintain a high level of readiness, resolutely defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and unwaveringly maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, end quote. So earlier, Taiwan's defense ministry said that it spotted a PLA carrier group led by the Shandong aircraft carrier sail through the Bashi Channel between the island and the Philippines before reaching waters southeast of Taiwan. So there's a Chinese aircraft carrier floating around southeast of Taiwan, and there's actually also a U.S. aircraft carrier a few hundred miles to the east of Taiwan as well. So Tsai and McCarthy were joined at the Presidential Library, Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California, by 17 other lawmakers. So there was more than initially reported. So basically, what's happened so far, what China has done is they have the aircraft carrier there. They announced patrols and inspections in the Taiwan Strait. So they're saying that they're going to inspect ships in the Taiwan Strait, stopping them and boarding them. Taiwan says that it's not going to cooperate. So maybe it could lead to an escalation if China tries to stop a ship and it refuses to stop or something. But they also said they're going to do it in the northern part of the strait, so not close to Taiwan. So we'll see how it plays out. And, they could still launch some big drills in response to this. We just haven't seen anything major yet, like they did when Pelosi went over to Taiwan. But yeah, we'll see what happens over the weekend. I would guess if they are going to do something like that, it'll probably happen this weekend. All right, the next one here. The CIA director says that the U.S. was blindsided by the Saudi-Iran normalization. So according to the Wall Street Journal, CIA Director William Burns visited Saudi Arabia earlier this week to express frustration over Riyadh's surprise normalization deal with Tehran that was brokered by Beijing. So Burns told Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that the U.S. has felt blindsided by Riyadh's steps toward normalization with Iran as well as Syria, two nations that are under crippling U.S. economic sanctions. Following the deal with Iran, Saudi Arabia is poised now to normalize with Syria. Riyadh is expected to invite Assad, the Syrian president, to an Arab League summit that it's hosting in May. And the Biden administration is against regional countries upgrading their ties with Syria because they want to keep the country isolated as it is U.S. policy, according to Tony Blinken, official policy to prevent Syria's reconstruction. That's the idea of the sanctions. A U.S. official told Reuters that Burns also discussed continuing intelligence cooperation with Riyadh. So, also on Thursday, Saudi Arabia and Iran's foreign ministers met in Beijing, marking the highest level meeting between the two countries since when they severed diplomatic ties in 2016. So, at the meeting, they agreed to reopen their embassies and to work toward other forms of cooperation. At a press briefing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said that Beijing was ready to continue mediating between the two sides. She said, quote, "We are ready to keep playing a mediating role, support both sides in building trust, dispelling misgivings, and realizing good neighborliness, and contribute China's wisdom and strength to promoting security, stability, and development in the Middle East." End quote. So they're blindsided. They're not happy, obviously. The U.S. publicly have to act like they're happy about this, because how can you not, be happy that two regional rivals are, making amends, and it could bring more peace to the region. But really, they want to keep Iran under sanctions. And the fact that the Saudis are going to start trading with them, step up trade with them, the U.S. doesn't want that. And especially when it comes to Syria. So it does seem like the U.S. influence is really, they're losing their influence and control over the region. All right, the next one here, the Saudis and the Houthis might renew a ceasefire soon. So warring parties in Yemen could soon sign a deal to renew a ceasefire that would last until the end of 2023. And this is according to a report from the New Arab. So a ceasefire that took effect in April 2022 expired last October. While there has been an uptick in fighting on the ground, there have still been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen since March 2022, and no Houthi missile and drone attacks inside Saudi Arabia. So sources told the New Arab's Arabic language sister site that the hopes for a new truce comes after Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman met with members of the Presidential Council that represents the Saudi-backed government in Yemen. A deal to extend the ceasefire could include the Saudis allowing more flights from the Sana'a airport, the resumption of oil exports, and the opening of roads that the Houthis have blocked around the city of Taiz. But the sources said that some Houthi demands might not be fulfilled. The Houthis have long called for a complete lifting of the blockade on Yemen as a precondition for a settlement. One of their main demands now is for government employees living in Houthi-controlled areas to be paid their salaries using revenue from Yemeni oil and gas sales. The UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, he said last month that he saw renewed momentum for a peace deal in Yemen following the Iran-Saudi normalization. While Iran is not nearly as involved in the Yemen war as the Saudis, the renewed engagement between Tehran and Riyadh is expected to bring more regional stability. And March 25th, so very recently, I didn't see many people talk about it. It marked the 8th anniversary of the U.S.-backed Saudi-led intervention in Yemen. Since then, at least 377,000 people have been killed in the war, and those were numbers at the end of 2021. More than half of them died due to starvation and disease that was caused by the blockade and the coalition's brutal bombing campaign that always targeted civilian infrastructure. So it sounds like, based on this report, and it looks like it's Saudi sources or Saudi-backed government sources, that if they do sign a deal soon, it's just going to be to extend the ceasefire. It doesn't sound like it's kind of going to be a lasting political solution. So I think that means that even if the ceasefire is signed, that the war could still, there's always a risk of escalation with the war. But hopefully they do sign something and agree on something more permanent, so we don't have to worry about this war escalating again. I know Scott Horton interviews Nasser Arabi a lot. He is a Yemeni reporter based in, I believe, Sana'a. And he has been very optimistic the last few times Scott interviewed him, basically saying the war's over. That's how he feels about it. So that's a really good sign. So hopefully, bring an end to it. But that's it for the news. Go check out our viewpoints. We have a lot of good ones. One from Ted Snyder: is France beginning to steer an independent course? One from Wayman Chen over at the Mises Institute: why most of the world isn't on board with the NATO Russia war. One from Dennis Kucinich. Where's he writing? Oh, he has a Substack. That's cool. On the bombing of the Nord Stream, this act of war against Europe requires congressional investigation. One from Ayman Mohammed Salah Al Sanabani. My family was massacred at my wedding. The U.S. is responsible. So this is a pretty powerful op-ed from a Yemeni whose family was slaughtered by a Saudi airstrike in Yemen in 2015. Dozens of his family members were killed, and the bride. It's just really a horrific story. And he's saying, why isn't Biden has to cut off the Saudis because this could happen again. And that is one thing. I mean, the Saudis are doing all these things with Iran and Syria, but what's the U.S. doing? They're not cutting off the Saudis when it comes to supporting them militarily in Yemen, because that's something that could definitely bring this war to an end quick, because the Saudis are entirely reliant on support from the U.S. and the U.K., but mainly the U.S. to maintain its air force. They wouldn't be able to do so without that crucial support. So the message here is cut it off, and then the war could really be brought to an end. And the spotlight is from Daniel Davis. Bad news: NATO tanks, planes, and artillery unlikely to win the Ukraine war. But that's it for me. That's it for the week. It was a lot of stuff today, a lot of news really kind of poured out today, I think, because there was a lot of built up stuff with all the Trump indictment. That's been the focus of the news in the U.S. But anyway, that's it for me for the week. Always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Share the show around. Tell your friends about it. I appreciate all the comments and the people that message me and tell me they like the show. It's pretty cool to know that a lot of people listen to this every day. I mean, that's the idea, and it's pretty awesome. So keep it up. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you after the weekend. Thank you.